Admiral Vexkoth stood tall on the bridge of his massive warship, the Dominion's Fist. His ceremonial armor gleamed under the harsh lights as he gazed out at the stars. For over 3,000 years, his people had ruled this part of the galaxy with an iron fist. Every alien race they had ever met either bowed down or got destroyed. There was no middle ground in the galactic hegemony. The bridge around him buzzed with activity. Dozens of alien crew members worked at their stations there, different shapes and sizes showing just how many worlds the hegemony had conquered. Some had tentacles instead of arms. Others had multiple eyes or strange breathing apparatus. But they all served the same purpose, keeping the hegemony in power. Vexkoth himself was an imposing figure. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, his 4 eyes could focus on different things at once, making him a deadly opponent in both space battles and political games. His skin had a metallic sheen that reflected his mood, currently showing the dull gray of routine boredom. "Admiral," came a voice from behind him. His tactical officer, a creature with insect-like features, approached with quick, nervous steps. The officer's mandibles clicked together as he spoke, a habit that showed his anxiety. "Long-range sensors are picking up something strange." Vexkoth turned slowly, his 4 eyes focusing on the tactical display that materialized in front of them. 12 bright dots appeared on the screen, moving steadily through space toward their patrol route. "Unknown vessels," the tactical officer continued, his voice getting higher with each word. 12 ships total. Their design is primitive, sir." Vexkoth moved closer to the display, studying the sensor readings. The ships looked nothing like any advanced civilization he had ever encountered. They were boxy, functional, with none of the sleek curves and artistic flourishes that marked truly advanced species. Most civilizations that had mastered space travel took pride in making their ships beautiful as well as deadly. These looked like flying boxes. "How primitive are we talking?" Vexkoth asked, though he was already forming his own opinion. "Very primitive, sir. No energy signatures we recognize, no weapon systems that match our databases. They look like they were built in some backwater system by beings who just discovered space travel." Vexkoth's mood skin shifted to a slightly brighter color, showing his growing interest. It had been months since they had encountered any new species, and even longer since they had found one weak enough to provide some entertainment. "Standard protocol," he ordered. "Hail them. Give them the usual warning." Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Captain Lee Jiho sat in his command chair aboard the exploration vessel New Horizon. The bridge around him was clean and efficient, with soft lighting that was easy on human eyes during long shifts. Unlike the hegemony's bridge with its mix of different alien technologies, everything here was designed for human comfort and efficiency. Jiho had been leading this deep space exploration mission for 3 months now. They were further from Earth than any human had ever traveled before, pushing the boundaries of known space. His crew of 200 scientists, engineers, and support staff had volunteered for this mission, knowing they might not return for years. The captain rubbed his tired eyes and checked his watch. It was late in the ship's day cycle, but space exploration didn't follow normal schedules. When something interesting happened, everyone stayed awake to see it through. "Captain," called out Park Minji from the communication station. Her voice carried a note of concern that made Jiho sit up straighter. "We're receiving a transmission from an unknown source." "Put it through the translator," Jiho ordered. The AI system worked quickly, converting the alien sounds into understandable Korean. What came through made Jiho's heart sink. The message was full of threats and demands. The aliens were ordering them to surrender immediately or face destruction. There was no attempt at peaceful communication, no curiosity about who humans were or where they came from. Jiho had hoped that when humanity finally met other intelligent life, it would be a moment of wonder and mutual discovery. Instead, their first contact was with beings who seemed to shoot first and ask questions never. "Sir," Minji said quietly, "should I prepare a response?" Jiho thought for a moment. Every decision he made here could affect the future of human-alien relations. If he responded aggressively, it might start a war. If he seemed too weak, these aliens might see humans as easy targets. Open a channel to their command ship, he decided. Let's try to talk this out peacefully. Back on the Hegemony flagship, Vexkoth listened to the human response with growing amusement. The alien, this human calling himself Jiho, spoke about peaceful exploration and scientific exchange. He actually seemed sorry for entering what he called your space, and offered to leave if there was some misunderstanding. Vexkoth had never heard anything so pathetic in his long military career. Most species at least tried to sound threatening. When faced with hegemony power, these humans sounded like they were apologizing for existing. Did you hear that? Vexkoth clicked to his bridge crew, his mood skin now showing the bright orange of amusement. They want to do science together. They think we're going to be friends and share knowledge. The bridge crew joined in his laughter, though some were more nervous than others. A few of the older officers remembered what had happened to species that had underestimated unknown opponents, but they kept their concerns to themselves. These mammals don't understand how the galaxy works, Vexkoth continued. They think space is some peaceful place where everyone gets along. Time to teach them the truth. He turned to his weapons officer, a massive creature with 6 arms that could operate multiple weapon systems at once. Deploy Battle Group 7. Full show of force. Let's make sure these humans understand their place in the universe. The weapons officer hesitated for just a moment. Sir, shouldn't we learn more? About them first? Find out what kind of technology they have, what their homeworld is like. Vexkoth's mood skin flashed red with anger. Are you questioning my orders? These are primitives in flying boxes. We could destroy them with a single ship if we wanted to. But I want them to see the full power of the hegemony before they die. It will make a better story when we report back to High Command. As Battle Group 7 began moving into position, Captain Jiho watched the alien ships approach on his display. His science officer, Dr. Kim Taeho, was running constant scans trying to understand the alien technology. Captain, Taeho reported, I'm reading some interesting energy patterns from their ships. Their power systems are actually quite advanced, but in a different way than ours. Different how? Jiho asked. They seem to rely more on raw power rather than efficiency, like they never learned to do more with less. It's not necessarily better or worse, just different. Jiho nodded, filing away this information. Everything they learned here could be valuable for future human-alien encounters, assuming they survived this one. The tension on both bridges was building as the two fleets approached each other, neither side fully understanding what they were about to face. The space around the human exploration fleet suddenly filled with massive alien warships. 50 of them appeared out of nowhere, their hulls gleaming with weapons that looked like they could destroy planets. They moved into position with military precision, surrounding the 12 human ships in a perfect battle formation. Captain Lee Jiho felt his stomach drop as he watched the tactical display. Each alien ship was at least 3 times the size of his largest vessel. Weapon ports glowed with deadly energy, and strange devices that he couldn't even identify pointed directly at his fleet. Captain, Communications Officer Park Minji called, out, her voice tight with worry. Incoming transmission from the alien fleet. The voice that came through their speakers was cold and filled with absolute authority. Admiral Vexkoth spoke like someone who had never been challenged in his entire life. This is Admiral Vexkoth of the Galactic Hegemony. You primitive creatures have entered our space without permission. You have 30 seconds to abandon your vessels before we demonstrate why we have ruled this galaxy for 3,000 years. The bridge fell silent. Everyone looked at Captain Jiho, waiting for his decision. These weren't just empty threats. The energy readings coming from the alien ships were off the charts. Each weapon system could probably destroy a human city with a single shot. Chief Engineer Kim Taeho was hunched over his control panel, his fingers flying across the displays as he ran emergency diagnostics on all their systems. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he checked and double-checked their defensive capabilities. Captain, he called out without looking up. Their power levels are incredible. I've never seen energy readings like this. Whatever those weapons are, they're not using any technology in our databases. At the weapons station, Officer Choi Hana sat perfectly still, her hands resting on her controls. She had trained for situations like this. But training was very different from facing an actual alien fleet that wanted to destroy them. Her job was to protect the ship and crew, but she was also a scientist at heart. Starting a war with humanity's first alien contact was the last thing anyone wanted. "Sir," Minji reported, checking her instruments. "I'm reading massive energy buildups on all their vessels. Their weapons are charging. They're not bluffing about the 30-second deadline." Captain Jiho closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. Everything he had dreamed about regarding first contact with alien life was falling apart. Instead of peaceful meetings and shared knowledge, they were facing immediate destruction from beings who saw them as nothing more than insects to be squashed. He thought about the 200 people under his command, scientists who had left, their families behind to explore the unknown, engineers who had spent years building these ships, young officers who had volunteered for this mission because they believed in humanity's future among the stars. "All ships," Jiho announced over the fleet communication system. "Raise shields to maximum power. Move into defensive formation pattern, Alpha. We're not abandoning our ships, but we're not starting a fight either. Maybe if we show them we can protect ourselves, they'll be willing to talk instead of shoot." The human ships moved smoothly into a tight formation, their shields glowing with protective energy. It wasn't an aggressive move, but it wasn't surrender either. They were showing the aliens that humans wouldn't just roll over and die. Admiral Vexkoth watched this maneuver with growing anger, his 4 eyes focused on the tactical display, as the human ships arranged themselves in what looked like a defensive pattern. How dare these primitives defy a direct order from the galactic hegemony? They think their little shields can protect them, he snarled to his bridge crew. "Show them what 3,000 years of galactic conquest has taught us. All ships open fire with everything we have." What happened next was like watching the birth of a new star. 50 alien warships unleashed their full power at the same moment. Plasma bolts that burned hotter than the core of most suns streaked through space. Quantum torpedoes that could crack moons in half flew toward the human fleet. Energy beams that could warp reality itself lanced out from weapons that had destroyed countless civilizations. The light was so bright that the bridge crews on both sides had to shield their eyes. The amount of energy being released was enough to power entire star systems. It was a display of raw, destructive force that had brought every other species in the galaxy to their knees. When the light faded and the sensors cleared, everyone expected to see empty space where the human fleet had been. Instead, the 12 human ships hung in space completely undamaged. Their shields hadn't even flickered. It was as if the most devastating attack in hegemony history had been nothing more than a light breeze. "What?" Admiral Vexkoth shrieked, his voice cracking with disbelief. His 4 eyes stared at the sensor readings, but the data didn't change. The human ships showed no damage at all. Not a scratch on their hulls, not even a power fluctuation in their systems. "Sir," his weapons officer stammered. "All weapons fired, at maximum power. Direct hits on all targets. The energy output was enough to destroy a small planet." "I can see the readings," Vexkoth screamed. "How are they still there? What kind of shields are those?" On the human flagship, Captain Jiho watched the alien bombardment with growing sadness rather than fear. The aliens had just tried to completely destroy his fleet without any warning, without any attempt to understand who they were, or why they were here. "Captain," Engineer Tejo reported, sounding almost bored. "Shields absorbed the entire attack. Power levels dropped by about 2%. Should I reroute some backup power to compensate?" "No need," Jiho replied quietly. "Keep monitoring their weapons. I have a feeling they're going to try again." He was right. Admiral Vexkoth was screaming orders at his weapons crews, demanding they increase power to levels that would normally burn out their own systems. "Maximum power," the Admiral roared. "Everything we have. I don't care if we overload our own weapons. Destroy those ships." The second attack was even more devastating than the first. The hegemony ships pushed their weapons beyond safe limits, pouring energy into space that could have sterilized entire worlds. Some of their own weapons actually exploded from the strain, but they kept firing. The human shields absorbed it all without any visible effect. Captain Jiho realized that peaceful contact was no longer possible. These aliens were determined to Destroy them, and they weren't going to stop until one side or the other was dead. They're really not going to listen, are they? He said sadly. He turned to Weapons Officer Hana. Defensive fire only. Disable their weapon systems. Try not to kill anyone if we can avoid it. What happened next would be talked about in hegemony military academies for generations, assuming any of them survived to tell the story. The human ships moved like they were dancing. Their formation shifted and flowed with a precision that seemed impossible for vessels of their size. Small fighter craft launched from hidden bays, moving between the alien ships with speed and agility that defied physics. Human railguns, weapons that used magnetic fields to fire solid projectiles at incredible speeds, began targeting the alien weapon systems. Each shot was perfectly placed, punching through armor that had protected hegemony ships for centuries. The aliens had never faced kinetic weapons like these before. Fighter craft guided by artificial intelligence systems swarmed around the larger alien ships. The AI could predict enemy movements, calculate perfect attack angles, and coordinate attacks with a precision that no biological pilot could match. Within the first 10 minutes, half the hegemony fleet had lost their main weapons. Within 30 minutes, most of them were drifting helplessly in space, their engines destroyed and their crews in shock. Admiral Vexkoth watched his fleet being systematically dismantled by beings he had thought were primitives. In 1 hour, 47 of his 50 ships were either destroyed or completely disabled. The age of hegemony supremacy was ending, and it was ending at the hands of creatures they had tried to dismiss as inferior mammals. The journey back to hegemony, High Command, was the longest trip of Admiral Vexkoth's life. His flagship, the mighty Dominion's Fist, limped through space with half its engines destroyed and emergency power barely keeping life support running. Behind him, only 2 other ships remained from what had been a fleet of 50 proud warships. The Admiral sat in his damaged command chair, staring at the tactical reports that still made no sense. How could 12 primitive vessels have destroyed his entire battle group? He had replayed the battle recordings dozens of times, but the facts remained unchanged. The humans had fought with technology that seemed impossible when they finally reached the capital world of the hegemony. Vexkoth felt his heart sink even further. The massive space station that served as High Command hung in orbit like a metal moon, bristling with defensive weapons and housing the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Normally, returning here filled him with pride. Today it felt like approaching his own execution. The Grand Council chambers were a sight that had intimidated countless alien ambassadors over the centuries. 12 massive thrones arranged in a circle, each one occupied by a supreme overlord from a different conquered species. These beings had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years, crushing anyone who dared challenge their authority. Admiral Vexkoth entered the chamber on unsteady legs, his ceremonial armor dented and scorched from the battle. His 4 eyes could barely focus as he approached the center of the circle, where a single chair waited for him. It felt more like a defendant's dock than a briefing position. Supreme Overlord Kethron was the first to speak. She was an ancient being, her species having been among the first conquered by the hegemony. Her voice carried the weight of centuries of absolute power, and when she spoke, everyone listened. "Admiral," she began, her tone dangerously calm, "your report claims that 12 primitive vessels destroyed nearly your entire battle group. Explain how this is possible." Vexkoth's voice shook as he began his account. "My lords, I must correct my initial assessment. These beings are not primitive. Their technology is not just advanced. It's decades ahead of anything in our databases. Their weapons cut through our best armor like it was made of paper. Their shields absorbed our most powerful weapons without even flickering." The chamber erupted in angry voices. Supreme Overlord Morthak, a massive creature with 6 arms and scales like metal, slammed his clawed appendage on the council table with enough force to crack the stone. "Preposterous," he roared. "No species has ever matched hegemony technology. We have conquered 1,000 worlds. Our weapons have brought entire civilizations to their knees." "Perhaps," suggested another overlord with multiple eyes that glowed, red in the chamber's dim light, The Admiral has suffered some kind of mental breakdown from the stress of battle. It would explain these impossible claims. But even as the Council argued, deep in the intelligence archives beneath the capital, analysts were poring over every bit of data they could extract from the battle. What they found was even more disturbing than Admiral Vexkoth's report. Intelligence Officer Zareth had been studying alien communications for over 50 years. She had decoded the languages of hundreds of species, learned to understand the military terminology of countless civilizations. But the human transmissions during the battle were unlike anything she had ever encountered. "Director," she called to her supervisor, her voice tight with concern. "You need to see this." Director Veltar approached her workstation, his tentacles writhing with nervous energy. "What have you found?" The human vessels were broadcasting constantly during the entire battle, Zareth explained, pulling up the communication logs on her screen. But these weren't military communications. They weren't coordinating attacks or calling for reinforcements. What were they doing then? "They were making scientific observations," Zareth said quietly. "Listen to this." She played back a recording of human voices speaking in calm, professional tones. The translation software had worked overtime to convert their language, but the meaning was clear. "Fascinating energy discharge patterns from the alien plasma weapons," one voice noted. "The quantum torpedo technology is crude but effective. Recommend studying the wreckage for technological insights." Another voice added, "Maintaining shields at minimal power levels. No need to stress the generators against these weapon types." "Director," Veltar felt his blood run cold. "Minimal power levels?" "It gets worse," Zareth continued. "There are multiple references to avoiding excessive force and proportional response. They weren't even trying to fight us at full capacity." Meanwhile, thousands of light years away, Captain Lee Jiho sat in his quarters aboard the New Horizon, writing his daily log entry. The human fleet had continued on their exploration mission as if nothing unusual had happened. To them, the encounter with the hegemony fleet was just another incident to document and learn from. Ship's log, Day 94 of the Deep Space Exploration Mission, Jiho spoke into his recorder. "Today we encountered our first hostile alien force. The contact began with threats and demands for immediate surrender, followed by unprovoked attacks on our fleet." He paused, thinking about how to phrase the next part. "We were regrettably forced to defend ourselves when diplomatic solutions proved impossible. Our response was kept proportional to the threat level, focusing on disabling enemy weapons rather than destroying their vessels entirely. I recommend immediate diplomatic contact with their leadership to prevent future misunderstandings." Jiho leaned back in his chair, already planning the scientific reports his crew would write about the encounter. The alien technology was fascinating, if somewhat crude compared to human systems. Their energy weapons were powerful but inefficient, and their shield technology seemed to be decades behind human standards. "Note for the xenobiology team," he continued. "The alien species we encountered appears to be highly aggressive but not necessarily evil. Their first instinct was violence rather than communication, suggesting a culture built around conquest and dominance. Future contact should proceed with extreme caution and strong defensive measures." He had no idea that his proportional response had just shattered the foundations of galactic civilization. Back on the hegemony capital world, the Grand Council was in emergency session. Reports were flooding in from across their territory as news of the defeat spread. Some conquered species were already showing signs of rebellion, sensing weakness in their masters for the first time in centuries. Supreme Overlord Kethran stood before a massive holographic display showing the entire hegemony fleet structure. With swift gestures, she began selecting ships from across their empire. "This cannot stand," she declared, her voice echoing through the chamber. "For 3,000 years, the hegemony has been absolute. No species has ever defeated us in open battle. If word of this spreads, our entire empire will collapse into chaos." Red indicators began appearing on the display as ships received mobilization orders. Dreadnoughts that had been stationed at key defensive positions, battle cruisers that had been terrorizing rebellious worlds, destroyer squadrons that had been Patrolling trade routes, every available vessel began converging on a single point: human space. "Mobilize the Grand Armada," Kethran commanded. 10,000 ships, every vessel we can spare without leaving our core worlds defenseless. This, humanity will learn why we have ruled for 3 millennia. The other supreme overlords nodded in agreement. This was not just about defeating one small fleet anymore. This was about preserving the very foundations of their empire. "Bring me their surrender," Kethran addressed the assembled fleet commanders, via hologram, "or bring me their ashes. Show the galaxy that the hegemony is still the ultimate power. Show them what happens to those who dare challenge us." As the largest military force in galactic history began moving toward human space, Captain Jiho and his crew continued their peaceful exploration, completely unaware that they had accidentally started what might become the greatest war the galaxy had ever seen. The moment 10,000 hegemony warships dropped out of hyperspace should have marked the end of any opposition. It was a sight that had brought entire galactic civilizations to their knees without a single shot being fired. The sheer scale of the fleet was beyond comprehension. Ships stretched across millions of miles of space, their combined mass greater than most asteroid belts. Supreme Admiral Morthak stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Domination. The ship was so massive it had its own gravitational field. Cities could have been built inside its hull, and its weapon systems could crack planets in half. It was the crown jewel of the hegemony fleet, a symbol of their absolute power over the galaxy. Morthak was a veteran of hundreds of battles, a being who had personally overseen the conquest of dozens of star systems. His species was naturally imposing, 12 feet tall with armored skin that could deflect small weapons fire. His 6 eyes could track multiple targets at once, and his mind had been enhanced with tactical implants that made him a living computer of warfare. But as he looked at the tactical display, something felt wrong. Instead of the massive human fleet he had expected to find, the same 12 exploration ships hung in space exactly where they had been before. They looked tiny and insignificant compared to his armada, like insects that had wandered into the path of a stampeding herd. "Sir," his sensor officer reported, "I'm detecting approximately 50 additional human vessels. They appear to be support ships of some kind. Still nothing that looks like a main battle fleet." Morthak's confusion grew. Where was the massive human armada? Where were the planet-killing weapons and reality-warping technologies that had supposedly defeated Admiral Vexkoth? All he saw were the same small ships that had started this whole conflict. The familiar voice of Captain Lee Jiho came through the communication system, and hearing it made Morthak's anger flare. This was the voice of the being who had humiliated the hegemony, who had shattered their reputation for invincibility. "This is Captain Lee Jiho of the Human Exploration Corps," the transmission began, and Morthak noted that the human sounded tired, almost sad. "We deeply regret the previous misunderstanding. We had hoped that our defensive actions would demonstrate that violence was unnecessary." Morthak listened with growing rage as the human continued speaking. "We're prepared to withdraw from your territory immediately if you'll grant us safe passage. We never intended to cause a conflict, and we believe peaceful coexistence is possible between our peoples." The Supreme Admiral's laughter was a sound like grinding metal against stone. It echoed through his bridge, causing several of his officers to step back in alarm. How dare this primitive creature speak to him about peace after destroying a hegemony? "Battle group, the time for mercy has passed, human," Morthak broadcast back, his voice carrying across space to every ship in both fleets. "You have embarrassed the galactic hegemony in front of the entire galaxy. There can be no forgiveness for such an insult. Witness the full might of our empire." He turned to his weapons coordinator, a being with multiple arms that could operate dozens of weapon systems simultaneously. "All ships, maximum firepower. I want to see those human vessels completely vaporized." What happened next was the most devastating display of firepower in galactic history. 10,000 warships opened fire at the same moment, creating a light show that could be seen from neighboring star systems. Planet crackers that could split worlds in half discharged their full power. Antimatter warheads that could destroy entire moons streaked through space. Gravity bombs that could create artificial black holes detonated in perfect synchronization. Reality distortion weapons that could literally tear holes in the fabric of space itself, fired with enough force to reshape local physics. The combined energy output was equivalent to several supernovas exploding at once. It was enough destructive power to sterilize every planet in a dozen star systems. The light was so intense that automated systems on both fleets had to engage emergency protocols to protect their crews from going blind. The energy discharge created electromagnetic pulses that interfered with sensors across half the galaxy. For several long minutes, no one could see what had happened through the chaos of unleashed destruction. When the energy finally dissipated and the sensors cleared, Supreme Admiral Morthak expected to see empty space where the human fleet had been. Instead, he saw something that made his tactical implants malfunction from sheer disbelief. The human ships hung in space completely unharmed. Not a single vessel showed any damage. Their shields hadn't even flickered. It was as if the most devastating attack in galactic history had been nothing more than a gentle breeze. On the bridge of the New Horizon, Chief Engineer Kim Tae-ho was checking his readings with the calm professionalism of someone monitoring routine systems. "Captain," he reported to Lee Ji-ho, "shields absorb the entire bombardment. Interestingly, their weapons are actually less advanced than the first group we encountered. The energy patterns are more chaotic, less focused. Should I recalibrate our shield harmonics, or is our current power level sufficient?" Captain Ji-ho closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. He had hoped that seeing their weapons fail completely might convince these aliens to finally listen to reason. "Keep shields at current levels," he replied, sadly. "Maybe we can still end this without too much destruction." But he could see from the alien fleet's movements that they weren't going to give up. They were preparing for another attack, pushing their weapons to dangerous overload levels in desperation. What followed was less a battle than a systematic dismantlement of everything the hegemony had built their empire on. From seemingly empty, space-advanced human dreadnoughts began decloaking. These ships were nothing like the exploration vessels the aliens had first encountered. They were purpose-built weapons of war, designed with technology that made the hegemony's best ships look like ancient relics. The human dreadnoughts moved with impossible precision, their targeting systems guided by artificial intelligence that could calculate thousands of variables in microseconds. Each shot was placed with surgical accuracy, striking exactly where it would do the most damage while avoiding areas where crew members might be killed. Hegemony ships that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries found their weapon systems disabled by shots that threaded through their defenses like they weren't even there. Massive dreadnoughts that had never been damaged in battle were reduced to drifting hulks in minutes. But the most terrifying part came when the electronic warfare began. Human computer systems reached out across space and began taking control of hegemony technology. Ships found their own weapons turning against their allies. Communication systems broadcast false orders that sent vessels crashing into each other. Navigation computers calculated jump coordinates that led ships directly into kill zones. The hegemony had always relied on their technological superiority to maintain control. Now they watched helplessly as that same technology was turned against them by beings who understood it better than they understood it themselves. Supreme Admiral Morthak stood on his bridge watching his fleet disintegrate around him. Ships that had been the pride of the hegemony were being picked apart with casual efficiency. The humans weren't even fighting with any apparent effort. Their ships moved like they were conducting a training exercise rather than fighting for their lives. In 3 hours, the Grand Armada that had taken centuries to build was reduced to escape pods and wreckage drifting through space. The pride of the galactic hegemony, the fleet that had conquered 1,000 worlds, had been destroyed by beings they had dismissed as primitive mammals. As Morthak prepared to broadcast his surrender, he realized that everything the hegemony believed about themselves, about their place in the universe, had just been proven completely wrong. Supreme Admiral Morthak floated helplessly in his escape pod, surrounded by the twisted wreckage of what had once been the most powerful fleet in galactic history. The Eternal Domination, his mighty flagship that had been the size of a small moon, was now nothing more than scattered debris drifting through space. Emergency lights flickered weakly in his cramped escape pod as he stared out at the destruction. His Six eyes could barely focus on the sight before him. Thousands of escape pods dotted the debris field like tiny stars, each one carrying the survivors of ships that had once terrorized entire star systems. The proud hegemony fleet that had taken centuries to build had been reduced to this in just 3 hours. With shaking hands, Morthak activated his emergency transmitter. The words felt like poison in his throat, but he had no choice. His remaining crew members were dying in the wreckage, and only the humans had the medical ships to save them. "This is Supreme Admiral Morthak of the Galactic Hegemony," he broadcast, his voice barely a whisper. I formally surrender. Please, help my people." The response came back almost immediately, and the calm, professional tone made everything worse. Captain Lee Jiho sounded like he was discussing the weather, not accepting the surrender of the galaxy's most powerful military force. "We accept your surrender, Admiral," Jiho replied. "Medical ships are already en route to assist your survivors. Our rescue teams will begin emergency evacuations within the hour." Morthak felt a tiny spark of hope. At least his people would live. But then Jiho continued speaking, and the Admiral's world crumbled even further. "Please note that this engagement will be filed as a minor border incident handled by our Exploration Division. We'll include it in our monthly report to Colonial Defense, but it shouldn't require any special attention." The escape pod fell silent, except for the hum of life support systems. Morthak stared at his communication panel, certain he had misheard. "Minor incident," he whispered. "Yes," Jiho continued, his tone still casual and matter-of-fact. "Our actual military command doesn't even know you exist yet. This was handled entirely by exploration crews and local patrol ships that happened to be in the area." Morthak could hear Jiho speaking to someone else in the background, probably one of his officers. The human captain's voice was muffled but still audible. "Officer Park, please update the incident report. Mark it as first contact hostile response and forward it to Colonial Defense for review. Standard priority should be fine. No need to wake anyone up over this." The Admiral felt his remaining heart stop beating. In all his years of military service, through hundreds of battles and dozens of conquered worlds, he had never felt terror like this. The casual way these humans were discussing the complete destruction of the hegemony's greatest fleet was more frightening than any weapon. "You mean—" Morthak's voice cracked as he spoke. "This wasn't your military?" Jiho's laughter came through the communication system, warm and genuine, as if he was sharing a joke with an old friend. "Oh no, Admiral. We're scientists and explorers. The ships that helped us out were just local patrol craft. They happened to be in the area for routine security sweeps of this sector. Our actual fleet divisions, our main battle groups, our home defense forces, none of them have been involved in this." The Supreme Admiral felt reality shifting around him. Everything he had believed about military power, about the balance of forces in the galaxy, had just been proven completely wrong. Jiho continued explaining, apparently unaware of the existential crisis he was causing. "Those dreadnoughts that showed up? They're just local patrol vessels. Each one is assigned to monitor about 50 star systems for pirates and smugglers. When they detected our distress signal, they came to assist. Standard operating procedure. Thousands of light years away, in the emergency command center on the hegemony capital world, the surviving leaders received Morthak's final transmission with absolute horror. Supreme Overlord Kethron sat frozen in her chair as the implications sank in. The species that had just effortlessly destroyed their greatest military force, the pride of 3,000 years of galactic conquest, considered it a minor incident, handled by scientists and security guards. "Call an emergency session," she whispered to her aide. Prepare surrender terms for the entire hegemony." But even as emergency meetings convened across hegemony space, their worst fears were being confirmed. Deep space monitoring stations began detecting energy signatures approaching from the direction of human space. The readings were unlike anything in their databases, power levels that made their most advanced ships look like children's toys. Science advisor Zelkoth had been studying alien technology for over 2 centuries. He had analyzed the weapon systems of thousands of species, had helped design the hegemony's most advanced warships. Now he stared at his instruments with growing terror. "What are those readings?" demanded the acting Supreme Overlord. his voice shaking with barely controlled panic. Zelkoth checked his instruments 3 times, ran diagnostics on all his sensors, and even had his team verify the data independently. The results were always the same. Based on the energy signature patterns and propulsion characteristics, he whispered, "I believe it's their actual fleet, coming to investigate what they called the minor incident." The terrible truth was finally becoming clear to everyone. In the room, humanity had been holding back. The devastating force that had destroyed the pride of their empire had been nothing more than a small exploration mission defending itself with minimal effort. The humans hadn't even been trying to fight a war. They had been trying to avoid one. In Restoniodides, the depths of space, massive shapes began decelerating from faster-than-light travel. Human dreadnoughts the size of moons dropped out of hyperspace with mathematical precision, their approach vectors calculated to surround the debris field. Each ship carried more firepower than the entire Grand Armada that now lay in ruins. Captain Jiho, still completely unaware of the panic he had caused, was filing his paperwork when his communications officer approached with a concerned expression. "Sir," Officer Park Minji reported, "I'm receiving a priority transmission from Fleet Command. They want to know why we're filing incident reports about alien contact without following first contact protocols." Jiho looked up from his reports with mild surprise. "Oh, I suppose they detected the energy discharges from the battle. Tell them it was just a misunderstanding with some local aggressive species. Nothing we couldn't handle with standard defensive measures." He paused, thinking. "Also mention that these aliens might be worth talking to once they calm down. Their technology is primitive, but they seem to have some interesting approaches to energy weapons. Could be useful for our research programs." Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the hegemony's 3,000-year empire was crumbling as news of the defeat spread. Species that had been conquered centuries ago were declaring independence. Hegemony governors were abandoning their posts. The military that had enforced their rule was in complete collapse. The age of the galactic hegemony was over, ended not by a great war or a massive rebellion, but by accidentally picking a fight with someone's scientists who were just trying to explore the universe peacefully. As more human ships arrived to investigate what their military command considered a routine first contact incident, the former rulers of the galaxy realized they were now at the mercy of beings who considered overwhelming military superiority to be a minor administrative detail. The humans had won a galactic war without even realizing they were fighting one.